Hey, Tolerators, it's me, Natalie, with your before show updates on all things Team Tolerator. So, we are sitting on the January, February, March side of life. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like the misogyny meltdown over on Patreon is well underway. That is a new series and show that I am producing for Patreon members only because there is a lot of scripting and a lot of vulnerability going on. I've already sang a song, I've already produced a skit, I'm already writing comedy. So take a chance on the misogyny meltdown and the way that To All the Men I've Tolerated Before is expanding and evolving with the link in the show notes. For January, we celebrated the Misogynist of the Year award ceremony. For February, we are focusing on the concept of love and self love being part of the resistance. And in March, why, yes, we're still going to do seasonal things with celebrating International Women's Month. And all of that will be wrapped up into our new variety show, Misogyny Meltdown. I cannot wait for you to check it out. Hey, Tolerators. This is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, your weekly look at everyday misogyny. Today, my guest is Jenn, host of Salad with a Side of Fries. Jenn is an optimal health coach and uses her show to knock away all of the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing surrounding our nutrition knowledge and the food diet industry. She is here today to talk about how women are affected by the lack of studies about how our bodies react to food and nutrition. Thanks for being here, Jenn.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for your patience with weird audio glitches or tech glitches. The internet is a wild, wild thing.
It is, but this is the beauty of podcaster to podcaster conversations is that, we know this drill.
We know it. We know it. So before the tech decided to wig out on us, we were talking about TikTok, and I was explaining to you how some people, mostly people who have like a very, well, my family is Croatian, so it's a European Mediterranean type of deal. But sometimes you'll have someone who has very classic, like European, like stocky body types, and they'll call themselves like a pet, like I'm peasant stock. I was definitely the person who was like working the Lord's land.
Oh my goodness.
And I love it because it's like a reclaiming of, I mean, unfortunately, I do think that like 90s heroin chic is coming back where
Ugh,
we're
I
all
can't
trying to.
even. Don't even get me started. I'm like,
Of all of the things to learn from us, that was the thing that you should have thrown away in the trash.
also the mom jeans. Why are we going back to mom jeans? They're flattering for no one. Nobody puts on mom jeans and goes, I look rockin'. I have my highest confidence level now.
Where is the SNL skit where it's like Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and a bunch of them just in their mom jeans being like, look at us, the sexiest we've ever been.
Exactly. We'll write it. We'll submit it.
Yeah, on TikTok, there's also like, it's like a mama-sance where it's like, show me what your mom used to dress like in the 90s. And I'm like, no one wants to go back to that.
I just struggle with that the 90s fashion is what's returning. Am I old enough for things in my lifetime to be returning and cool again? Like, oh, I don't know.
Tell me about you and Salad with a Side of Fries.
Yeah. So I joke that I grew up like the skinny one in a family of dieters. And then I grew up a dancer, so I was very aware of my body. But I also, I ate vegetables, I ate healthy, I didn't really have to think about it. But also, whatever diet my dad was on is kind of what we were all eating. So there were times growing up where, I'd come home from school and I'd have a Nutrisystem snack because that's what was in the pantry. But it was like, I ate when I was hungry, I didn't when I wasn't, things were fine. Then between high school and college, I started to gain weight. And I think it was a combination of like the foods I was eating changed, my activity level changed, and genetics are real. We can talk about genetics in the context of all of this stuff too. I started to gain weight and I was like, okay, I know what to do because I watched my family do this my whole life. You do this diet and then you do that diet and then you do that diet and you're like on this roller coaster and you gain and lose and you do the whole thing. And it's like, but why can't I just do this once?
Which is how I feel about laundry. Like, I'm like, why can't I just do this once and it's done for the year?
So I'm not going to lie, like the two things I procrastinate above all, one is laundry and the other is taking out the trash and recycling.
Me too. Why is that the hardest part? I would rather just have a stack of cardboard stacked up against my porch than be like, well, I guess I should move the car and put the recycling bin.
I don't know. Anyway, so I did every diet out there. You know, I sort of joke like there isn't a diet that exists on this planet that I haven't done, my family hasn't done, or we don't know somebody who's done it. Even with all of that, when I learned about the curriculum that I've now based my entire practice on, I was like, no, 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 that's okay. I've got my thing, right? My thing was the crazy roller coaster going up and down, but I didn't need whatever they had, you know? And then I saw people who were following this program and I noticed two things. One thing was that the people were keeping it off. The other was this woman telling her story of removing like 150 pounds. And honestly, anything she said after that, I didn't hear because I was having like my own conversation in my head that was like, wait, what? Like 150 pounds is another human attached to her. And in looking at her, I was like, I can't see where 10 pounds could have possibly been on your body. Like the fact that you're telling me that like another human was there, like does not compute to me. So I had this moment of like, Jennifer, right? Like they know something you don't know. Because in your world, what that story is does not compute. So I worked with a coach. I followed the program, completely changed my life. Like the only thing that's allowed me to say I've kicked my food issues. And so from there, I set out on a mission to pay it forward and help people help themselves with this information because I really felt like it was the nutrition education we're all supposed to know and no one ever taught us. And so this was 2007. So I became a health coach. I started working with clients on the side, nights and weekends. I had my full-time job. I was building a health coaching practice. I didn't leave my full-time job until July of 2019. So then August of 2019, I launched the podcast Salad with a Side of Fries because I don't know what to do with free time. And you know,
This was a COVID project.
it was well before COVID. This
Yeah.
was,
No, I'm talking about to all the
your
men I've
show. Oh,
tolerated.
yeah.
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 It was I'm unemployed because of COVID, so I guess I will put one of my ideas that I've had to paper and do
Yeah.
it.
So interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, fast forward, here we are. I'm also an insatiable student. So I continue learning. I add that to the curriculum that I teach and to the podcast and all of these things. And so I'm really on a mission to help people reclaim control of their health. And, you know, the big overarching mission of everything I do is to change the state of healthcare. No big deal.
No big deal. I know I'm trying to end the patriarchy. You're trying to rewrite healthcare. It's just these small tasks on our to-do list.
Totally. Like an easy, like 3-hour venture. Yeah.
Yeah, like the fact that it hasn't even happened yet, well, that just makes me feel lazy. Like, I still have to deal with misogyny. I'm not even doing the work. Because we talked about when I had a co host named Dina and we wanted to go into how we feel about our bodies and food and eating. I still wasn't at a place in my food and nutrition exercise journey where I had told my therapist that I believe that I experienced disorder eating. I was still in a very, because I feel like the disservice that our system does is that we have to look to something or someone to blame. And for a lot of women, it's, well, how did your mom treat food in the house? And I was like, well, my mom was a slim fast mom. She was a slim fast at 4 while we watched Oprah kind of mom, making sure that my dad had food and us kids had cereal if we didn't like said food. Slim Fast eventually turned into Weight Watchers, eventually turned into Curves, eventually
Oh my God, remember curves?
when I tell you that I was driving through a part of town that I'm not at very often, and I saw a Jenny Craig next to a Curves, I was like, "What year is it?"
And it's interesting, like you have this experience of like your mom's dynamic with food is very much how we learn a dynamic with food. What has shifted though is the food itself and sort of going back, I don't know, kind of taking a step back to say even before, your mom's dynamic with food is really where the issues are. It is a function of, perception, right? In society, right? So we have this sort of like social norm thing, right? But the other side of that, and why so many of us turn to food, is because we are actually so ill equipped and undereducated about emotion. And so a vast majority of people, right, food becomes a coping mechanism. Our disordered behavior tends to be a function of not wanting to feel something. So it's right, and it becomes the easier medicine than a lot of other things. And so if we sort of back up, we're undereducated in terms of handling life and stress and emotions and even understanding emotions and having words for all of the emotions that are out there. And then, and even look what I just said, like emotions that are out there. No, like the emotions that are in
No,
here.
we have them.
Like, right, right. So it's like we're so undereducated there. And then the evolution of our food has been so economically driven, not health driven, that put us into this place where you have those two things combining and it is a perfect storm for disease.
Yeah, because it's baffling. I'm a single household. It's me and my cat. And to try and shop for a person of one is
The worst.
impossible.
I
The
do not know
worst.
how.
And then it's like, well, I guess because also I have come to realize that a lot of my disordered eating gets triggered because I am a person. We were just talking before we logged on how I look every day at my calendar and I'm like, who is this lady who made all of these commitments and choices? Because I would like to strangle her.
Right.
And I'm in a constant state of overwhelmed and or stressed. And then on top of that, preparing food that is going to sustain your energy in it of itself is a chore.
So that's a shift, right? It doesn't have to be a chore. Part of that is we've been taught. That's part of the whole gimmick is that we have this idea that something that provides nutrition is daunting. Something that will give us energy is impossible if you don't have time, or that we even have to do it at home. Like I did this for over a decade, eating out 3 meals a day because I worked in hedge funds and had a side hustle of a health coaching practice. So like you can do this eating out. You can do this. I never have groceries in my house. Like my refrigerator looks like a college dude. It's fine. You can do this, but we've never been given those tools.
Correct. When I go to the grocery store, as a woman who is in her 30s, who has lived on her own for a decade, if not longer, and I'm just standing there. I was just telling my mom today that I signed up for a grocery meal service. Like it's every plate. They're not sponsored or whatever. They're just like the clearance version of HelloFresh. And, and I was telling my mom, I go, it's because every time I go to the grocery store, I conceptually know that I know how to make tacos. But every step of like making sure that I have everything to make tacos and then we'll have the energy on Taco Tuesday to make said Taco Tuesday puts me in a freeze zone. It
Yeah.
just freezes me up.
Yeah. And we don't even need to do that either. Right? Like we could take anything we have and turn it into a taco if we feel like having tacos on Tuesday or Saturday. We have this idea of what we're quote unquote supposed to do. And ultimately, right, that freeze is a stress response and it is a function of food decisions through our lives have become emotional rather than intellectual. And that for me was the biggest shift in learning this information, was that it changed the food decision into something that was much more intellectual. And then it wasn't like, in my office on Mondays, they would have like the free breakfast in the communal kitchen. They had a tray of like the mini baked goods, right? So you're like mini croissant and muffins and all the things. And then there was a thing of fruit, but like I'm really picky about fruit. And of course, berries are expensive. So berries weren't the fruit that was in there, right? Like that's
Mhm.
full of things that I don't really like. And then every Monday morning, I'd walk in the kitchen to get my water. And it's like, just don't look over there. Don't look over there. Don't look over there. Right? like, like, just don't look at the croissant because they're talking to you, right? And they have a voice. And so for a long time, it was like, why can't I just not eat the muffin? Right? Like, why do I suck? Why do I have no willpower? Like, why can't I eat the muffin? Right? Fast forward, I was working with this coach, and then all of a sudden I walked in the kitchen. I was like, oh, wait, I get why that muffin's appealing to me right now. So what I need to do is this, and then after that, let me see how I feel about the muffin. And I could then, for, ever walk into that kitchen and decide if I wanted the muffin or not. And it was fine. It was like the muffin didn't have a voice anymore the way it used to.
What is part of the process from taking food from an emotional, because I think when it comes to the way that I view how we've become trained to view food or whatever, it's like I had to, it's a scarcity thing. That's why sometimes like a restaurant could be triggering for my overeating or whatever. Because, well, honestly, it happened last week at trivia. One of the bartenders lovingly told me to look out for me. They were like, "Oh, do you like the booze slushy today?" And I did. It was a Sex on the Beach slushy. And she was like, "Oh yeah, one of the guys like just threw it into the slushy machine, but no one has the recipe, which is such like a disservice because now like no one wrote it down. It was just a brainchild and it's really good." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, are you saying that I might never have this again?" And she just laughed at me because what a ridiculous thing to say. And I ended up going home drinking two more drinks than I normally do, which is fine. I was out, I was having like fun or whatever. But I told people, I was like, "Ah, because what if I never had the slushy that I was really enjoying ever again?" Like things feel, we're constantly in a scarcity mindset
Yes. I
about it.
felt like I would have times where like you sit down at the plate and you're eating as if it's going to be like the last supper, like the last time you're ever going to eat ever. And so part of it is reminding ourselves that that's actually not the case. And that if we really want it, we can have it tomorrow, right? Or figure out how to make it ourselves, like, you know what I mean? Or brainstorm with them to make the slushy, Sex on the Beach thing again, whatever. Yeah. Now, having said all of this, it is when I work with a client, it's over 12 weeks. And the way I describe it to people is like, most plans, diets, programs, whatever, all those things. PS for the podcast people, I'm air quotes on all of those. All of those things, you get the book week one and you try to do all the things. And you're like, this is incredibly overwhelming. How does anyone do this and have a life? After a couple weeks, you're like, forget it. This is too much, right? It's like your Taco Tuesday in the grocery store freeze moment. You throw it out the window and like onward. Rather, the way we approach this is more like a college course in that you're not going to pass the final on day one. And you might learn something in week 4, 5, 6, 8 that you've been doing for the last 3, 5, 7 weeks that might not be our best choice. And that's okay. It is a process. And so if we're going to make this different than every other time we've tried this before, we got to do it differently. Luckily, you don't have to figure that out, right? That's why you've got me or somebody to guide you through that process. But it's a process of shifting these things. Fundamentally, at the start, it's about understanding how foods impact our body and how our body processes food. So if we're craving sugar, if we're craving what we think of as carbs, right? Bread, pasta, baked goods, chips, cookies, all those things. The most delicious things, right?
The most delicious things in the entire world.
When we crave those, it is typically connected to a lack of protein. Because what happens, right? Carbs are the preferred fuel for the body. When our blood sugar drops and our body is like, yo, I need fuel, it's going to send us signals for fast fuel. What is fast fuel? Those high glycemic things, the things that are going to turn into sugar, the carbohydrate that our body needs as quickly as possible. So it's chemical that you're having those cravings. It's not a moral failure. It's not a lack of willpower. It is actually biochemical that we're experiencing some of these things. But if we've never been taught that, and our society says, if you have a weight challenge, it is a willpower issue. It is a moral failing. There is something wrong with you. We think that there's something wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with you. It is chemical. We've never been taught this. And to your point before of like the Slim Fast thing and what our parents grew up with, right? Our parents and their parents. So most of us, our parents are boomers, I think, right?
Yeah, mine fall under the Gen X category, I think because of how young they had me.
Got it. But even so, they're similar in that for those generations, convenience was king. It was the TV dinner. It was because if you go back to the Depression and World War II, women were no longer at home as much. So the Depression was the scarcity. We've got to eat everything on our plate. Children are starving somewhere in the world. So we learned that, right? Our parents learned that, then they said it to us. Then they weren't both in the home as much, right? Their mom, after World War II, right? Rosie the Riveter, all the things, like mom was out of the house. And so that made the TV dinner and the convenience thing and all those things really important. Now, fast forward, that we inherited, right? We learned all of those habits and behaviors. And our food supply started saying, oh, people want convenience? Let's get convenient, right? We need food to not go bad. What could we put in the food to make it not go bad? Wait, there are people starving in the world. How can we get more crop out of this plot of land? How can we produce wheat in such a way? Like, I did a whole episode on ancient wheat versus modern wheat, and I promise you it's more interesting than that just made it sound. But basically, the inventor of modern wheat won like the Nobel Prize for solving world hunger. Guess what didn't happen? We didn't solve world hunger. But modern wheat has much more gluten than ancient wheat. And now what do we see? All these people with challenges around gluten. So the thing, like there's a lot in everything that's evolved in our food industry, in our food system, in our eating habits and what's available. Like even in every fad diet, right? There's information and science and frankly some good intention that has snowballed and gone awry. And instead of as a collective saying, oops, that didn't work, let's back up a hot second and reevaluate, the economics guide us to, well, here, we need a pill for that. This is the solution, is to add something else to the equation instead of going back and saying, wait, we created this problem. We can undo this problem. Our version of undoing a modern problem is by adding another product.
100%. And that's why the second enemy of the show is capitalism, because capitalism is the death of us all.
Well, so I used to work in hedge funds.
Well, that's true, yes.
I'm not anti-capitalism. I am anti-blind capitalism.
Oh, I like that term. Tell me more.
Because I think capitalism can drive innovation. There's a lot of really amazing things that have come out of capitalism. I don't think that's the enemy, right? The enemy is when we don't have humility, when we don't value reflection to say, oh, wait, that didn't work. Can we go back and readdress, right? Can we go back to that thing and re-engineer it in a way that maybe doesn't have this outcome? Because it's really hard to see the snowball of 20, 30 years down the line from the things that are happening now. And P.S., I do think that's a bit of female leadership versus male leadership, because women tend to think down the road. We fast forward. We think about all the things, right? We're packing for a trip. We think about all the scenarios of all the things that could happen while we're away and we're prepared for them, right? A dude is like, couple t-shirts, couple pairs of shorts, that'll do, right? Like we have all these other things prepared for any scenario because we think in that way.
Yeah, when we recorded an episode with Paige Folkers, who's been involved with the show before, and we were talking about women in STEM, and I was talking about this very dangerous idea about when science is directly tied to your personal funding and money and things like that, where it's like, I understand where people double down on their very bad mistakes, Elizabeth Holmes, because someone else is saying, like, we will rip away your money.
Right. And ugh, I also like went in a deep rabbit hole of Elizabeth Holmes. Like, we'll have to do another episode all on that. But like, it's really, you're right. It's really interesting the way we have evolved into funding for innovation and new companies. And by the way, it is hard for women or, women run and led organizations to get the same funding that organizations run by men get. It's all around, contributing to the issues that we're experiencing in our food supply.
Yeah. And then when it comes to preservatives in food and the way that we've changed our food, because I read a fascinating, it's a work of fiction that I believe is rooted in a true story. I read The Seed Keeper, which was about an indigenous woman who married basically a sharecropper in the South. And it was right on the verge of scientific seeds, like those seeds that were like mass produced instead of heritage seeds. And how she was like, between the runoff of our water and the weird science that's going into our seeds, we're really heading into a problem. But it was so capitalistically, like, it was so convenient to be like, but now you can buy 300 seeds instead of relying on 45 seeds to create those 300 seeds.
In the process of our food supply, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to work backwards to the seed or start with the seed. I think we work backwards. Okay. We go to our grocery store. We want the apple that's not bruised. We want the banana that's not quite ripe so that it'll last us a little bit longer, right? In order for us to get the pretty apple and the banana that's still going to last more than eating it in the next 7 minutes. And our grocery stores are generally not so proximally efficient compared to where the farm is, right? So there's a lot of travel that has to happen. Let's say, in a conservative view, there's a week of travel, right? So we have this banana. We need it to be still kind of green a week after it's picked, which means what color is it, right? It is real underripe when it's picked, right? And then it transports in a truck and eventually gets to your grocery store. The nutrients in our food come from the soil that it's grown in. If we pull or pick a food before it is ripe, once it is detached from the vine, because the vine is the only way our food is getting anything from the soil, right? So once that's detached, we're not getting any nutrition from the soil into that food. So picking it before it's ripe dramatically affects how much nutrition is in that banana that we're getting when it's pretty. Fast forward to that, to the thing about the seeds, right? And sharecropping and all these things. We have evolved into monocrop farming. You are a corn farmer. You are an orange farmer. As opposed to when we learned about farming as kids, right? You have crop rotation. You do certain things certain times of the year. And what that means is that depending on what you're growing, it's pulling different things from the soil, different nutrients from the soil, and giving different nutrients back to the soil. So if we're only ever growing one crop, it's always pulling those same nutrients from the soil. Our soil is depleted of the nutrients that it needs. Then we go to the seeds where we get all this extra output from the same square, whatever acre of land. The soil hasn't changed. The amount of nutrients haven't changed. It's just dispersed between more output. So, bottom line, we have issues today that our grandparents and great grandparents never had, even if we were eating the exact same foods, because a banana, an apple, spinach, broccoli today does not have the same nutrition as the apple, spinach, broccoli, banana that our grandparents and great grandparents ate.
Right. And so do you think economically, population wise, all of it, are we even in a place where we can go backwards and start farming in the way? No.
I mean, the capitalism would have to support that, right? There would have to be incentives to go back to sharecropping, to go back to crop rotation, right? But a lot of that, even if you think about like the education, the expertise, like this corn farmer may not know how to grow the things other times of the year, right? Because it's sort of evolved. So it's complicated, which is why it's not, oh, well, this is just what we have to do. Like, check the box. We can make that happen.
We wanted to focus on the science and the education piece and how, because we're so uneducated, and like you just blew my mind about, because I think what happens is like, it's the same with Taylor Swift's boyfriend. Like conceptually, I knew he was a man named Joe who lived in the woods, but until they broke up, I had never seen a photo of him. And I'm like, oh,
Correct.
there he is. So when you say wheat pulls out A, B, and C from the soil, but spinach pulls out X, Y, and Z, I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. They're different plants. But until someone sits down and tells you, like, no, we're ripping nutrients from our soil, and that is where our crop problems are coming from, then you have no awareness whatsoever of what's happening with the food that's on your table.
Right. And when we look at animal protein, right, there are a lot of documentaries out there. There's a lot of things. But like, I firmly believe the biggest issue that we see, like the China study and forks over knives and some of these things out there, right? I believe it's a function more of the quality of the meat than meat itself. Because if you go back through human history, yes, testing is different, right? Like we have different capacity and ability to test for certain things, and we have an awareness of different diseases than we knew that, right? So, like, there are other variables. I'm not saying that, like, a disease didn't exist then because maybe we just didn't know about it. But the instance of disease, like, we are a generation, and I believe it's the first time in history where our generations have a shorter life expectancy than past generations. That is messed up. And we're doing it because the incentives in, growing and farming and all these things are not aligned with health outcomes. What they're feeding to the cows in a factory farm has implications for our health. But at the time, right, giving the cow this antibiotic seemed like a great idea. Like, oh my God, we're geniuses. Fast forward, oh, the cow has the antibiotic, then we eat the things from the cow, and then we as humans have resistance to antibiotics. Like, oops, right? But now that we know that, right, it's very expensive to go back. And so unless the economic incentive is there, right, it's not really. So for each of us, it is a lot about every time you're in that grocery store, how much effort are you putting into the quality of the things that you're buying? It sounds so cliche, and I'm trying to come up with other words to say it, right? Like, oh, vote with your pocketbook. But like, for real, that's what happens. The more we buy the genetically modified apple that is the size of your head, the less incentive there is to have non-genetically modified produce. If we are all buying, and listen, like, there's also an economic piece of real life that, like, organic food can be more costly. But I also argue that, like, it's costly now versus costly later, because you're going to pay the money somewhere. You're either paying it now in the quality of your food and getting better quality food, or you're paying it later in your healthcare costs, because you will not end up without spending it somewhere.
I know money is one of those weird things where I'm like, well, money travels and it's fluid. So when it comes to the time, because I am very guilty of the wait until it's a big problem and a bigger bill to deal with it, because it's like, And it's just one of those things where we're currently in a place where a lot of people are being very honest about how we're not making enough money to sustain all of the things that we have to sustain. So sometimes waiting it out until it's a bigger problem that you have to deal with head on becomes the economical decision for your household because it's what you have to do. It's between a light bill and a fixing this problem. And I think that when it comes to food, people just want to write it off as a, well, if you were working hard enough that you could support yourself. But people are working hard enough and they're still not supporting themselves. And now we're adding in this extra layer of they also can't support themselves in a healthy way that lengthens their life.
So we used to define food deserts as a lack of food. The newer, more, modern definition of a food desert is a lack of fresh food because you can find fast food. You can find a Starbucks almost anywhere. And so to your point too, I also want to make it clear, like, perfection can't be the enemy of improvement. So we might not be able to have, the organic berries, but I would still encourage you to feed your children berries over Skittles. And we say that and like we sort of laugh because we're like, well, of course. But that is a real trade-off, and that is a real conversation that people have to have and think about. And when the Skittles, going back to the whole, system, right? When the Skittles are 99 cents and even the non-organic berries are $4, I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? And so there are a lot of choices and a lot of trade-offs. And all we can do is what we're willing and capable to do in any given moment. And I fully believe, like, we're all just trying to do the best we can with the information that we have at any given moment. So my objective now is to give you more information so that your best in any given situation, given the information that you have, is progress.
And when you're knee deep in it all, in the science and the nutrition and the diet planning and all of it, where do you see, this was a direct effect of the patriarchy or the misogyny that we live under? Because I'm pretty sure that'll take us back to like the slim fast of it all.
Right. It's all of it. I mean, it's our food supply. It's how we decide to fix a problem, right? Like I was saying, like the solution is just to invent the next pharma thing because the money is there. And again, like what we started with, the 90s heroin chic, like our idea of what beauty is. By the way, the other side of this whole equation is that discrimination based on someone's body, their weight, is the 100% most socially accepted form of discrimination there is. It is well studied that the perception of people who carry extra weight are not as smart, are lazy, are all of these things. And it is all built into a system that keeps us in this cycle of trying to figure out and separate our self-worth from our body. What is it actually that I want my body to look and feel like versus what I think my body is supposed to look and feel like based on what's on the magazine covers or what's in the movies or the Barbie that I'm playing with or all of these things? Because we learn through what we're surrounded by as humans, right? And we're not going to escape that. We have to recognize that it's contributing to the problem. And a lot of the systems and structure, not just, in the food world, but like in medicine, is very much based on male bodies, right? Like what year did women get the right to vote? Do you remember?
I know that it just had its 100th year anniversary right before COVID.
Right. I think it was like 1920, something like whatever. All
Yeah.
the history people don't come at me.
And it took
Yeah.
88 years. I do know that because when
Yes.
I had to study it for my theater job, I burst into tears in my office because I had never done that math before and realized that there had been like 3 wars, 4 generations of women working on this. Like,
And so if we think it took that long for women to be able to get the right to vote, research and pharmaceuticals, like dosage of pharmaceuticals is based on male bodies. We don't know a lot about we're we're learning more and more, but there isn't a ton of research on, postpartum and menopause and all these things because they're only women things. And it's really doing a disservice because, I mean, not only are women, theoretically 50% of the population, but if you consider that every man has to come from a biologically female body, like, why can't we connect those dots? But, you know,
For me, it's such common sense. And I say this all the time to the point where like people can almost set their watch and their calendars to it, where I'm like, my antidepressants don't work during certain points of my menstruation cycle.
yep, of course they don't.
Of course they don't. And my antidepressants are also supposed to be keeping kind of under control the ADHD that no one will take me seriously about. So when I'm off the rails, hyper, can't sit still, and am also going to scream cry at you about something, I'm like, well, yeah, nothing's regulating me anymore, and including my food.
Right. Our food isn't. Also, the way pharmaceuticals work is a lot of times we are adding additional hormone or adding endocrine disruptors versus looking at, wait, there are things that we can do. And this is very much like a Western medicine thing, but our doctors are taught to disease states, not to human function. Human function is much more of like what we call functional medicine, or even like Eastern medicine is more about how do we restore the human to human function versus Western of saying, how do we treat a disease state by managing symptoms? Part of why the doctor doesn't have you on a different, right, changing your dosage at certain times of the month is because they don't understand it. And we also don't have, back to that humility, they're not taught to admit, I don't know, or this is what we need to look at, and I'm not the person who knows that. Even the specialization of what's happened in our system of medicine, where, right, like something with your heart, you go to the cardiologist, something with your lungs, you go to a pulmonologist, something, right, like something with your veins, you're going to like a vascular physician, like all these things. Everybody is starting to look in their silo with the blinders on. Yet, the human body is so intricately connected. Your diagnosis is not like, if you've been diagnosed with heart disease, it doesn't mean that your liver and your kidneys are fine. It means that your heart is the organ system that failed first. And so our system of looking and specializing has some value and also has some implications. And so, again, like, what can we do? Have your specialist and maybe also find a functional practitioner. Have your specialist and have somebody who is more adept at some of those interconnections, who might be able to help you create some of the questions that you then bring to your specialist, because there's a lot of tools out there if we're willing to do the thing, you know?
And there's a lot of uneducation around just, I mean, do you remember being, because I'm a millennial, I remember being like a millennial who had to make a doctor's appointment for the first time. And now I'm watching like millennial women in my life have babies, and they're like, the doctor keeps asking me if I have any questions. And I kind of just want to go, what did the lady before me ask? I don't even know where to start when it comes to questions. And I was like, well, that's purposeful.
Right. I mean, and, they ask if we have questions with the best intention, but we don't even know enough to ask an educated question, or we think that the question that's actually coming up is a silly question, and so we don't ask it. This is maybe a tangent, but there's a whole thing of like healthcare 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. So 1.0 was, do you remember the TV show Heart of Dixie?
Yes.
Right? So there's like one doctor for everybody in the town, and they treat everybody for every ailment, and they know your mom, your grandma, your great great grandma that like you've never met, that like they know things about your medical history that you don't know, right? There were things about that were amazing, right? Like the doctor had a relationship with their patients. They knew a lot of the history, right? They could connect the dots. They could see things happening, but there wasn't communication like a doctor in this state saw something and then the doctor in the next state saw something, and it was like, it was novel because there was zero sort of bigger communication there, right? and like zero systems thinking, right? Then healthcare 2.0 was all systems. It's our electronic medical records. It's every doctor is a specialist. Like if you have something, you want to go to the person who knows that thing. And again, there's a lot of value in that, right? But the side effect of that is that everybody's paying attention to checking the boxes in the chart to make sure that the insurance is going to reimburse for the time sitting with the patient. We don't have longer than 7 minutes to talk to a patient. They're sort of dismissing the things because the things we're talking about don't fit neatly in a box that they can check,
Right.
right? Healthcare 3.0 is hopefully where we're headed, which is a lot of what we see with like concierge medicine or the membership medicine, where it's less based on insurance reimbursement and more based on kind of taking what worked about 1.0 and 2.0 and trying to eliminate the pieces that don't work about 1.0 and 2.0, right? So we're building that relationship. We have time to talk to the provider. They are asking those questions. They're asking about our poop. They're asking about our sleep. They're asking about all the things that, like, when was the last time your doctor asked you about any of those things, right?
Right.
And then they have time to spend with you and they confer with the other specialists in the practice that there's what we call a care team. And maybe there is a coach there who helps the patient or client implement the challenges or implement the lifestyle shifts that will allow us to reverse some of the health effects that have happened, right? Or actually create a different lifestyle that breeds health. And then we sort of have all these pieces coming together. And so hopefully we're getting to the healthcare 3.0 thing, but being a part of that care team is that the patient is as much a member of that team as every physician and expert, because you know your body best. You know when something feels off. And we've taught ourselves out of paying attention to how our body feels. We've taught ourselves out of understanding hunger and satiety and emotions and all of these things, right? But we know. We may not be able to articulate it in a way that meets the medical criteria. But if the physician can look at us and say, you know your body best, I'm going to continue to ask questions so I can understand in my language what this might be and what our best next steps are, right? There's a partnership there in a healthcare 3.0 model that currently really doesn't exist on the whole. In pockets, it will.
Yeah. I believe private practice on ABC was the last time I saw something like that.
Yes, for
happen.
sure. 100%.
Yeah. And by the way, just to like put it in perspective, if your doctor is only giving you 7 minutes to do like a diagnosis and a checklist of your symptoms to move you on, that's also what the hair cuttery and great clips say should be the average haircut. So if you've ever, like I have, sat in a parking lot and cried after you've been waterboarded at the Great Clips for 7 minutes because you weren't like handled with care, oh, it's the same amount of time.
Wow. That is a good perspective.
Yeah, because I didn't know that until my sister was like, you know that they train their stylist at the haircut at Great Clips to be like, that person from your chair to Bill, 7 minutes, like 9 minutes. I was like, no, I did not know that. I just manically decided I needed my haircut that day. We are rounding up on the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and move us into our ending point with our manifestations and takeaways. So we've talked about a lot, and a lot of it I think is going to be startling to some people who haven't. I mean, my friend did text me once and go, do you ever look at your like loaf of bread that you've forgotten to throw away and gone, why doesn't mold want to grow on bread anymore? And I go, no, because I know it's like apocalyptic. That's why mold doesn't want to grow on bread anymore. It's a brave new world. But so I think a lot of this information people are going to have to process. And then they're going to be like sitting with it for a while. But if you had one takeaway, like something that you would needlepoint on a pillow and hand out as birthday gifts, what's one lesson you would want people to leave with?
You are in charge of your health.
I love that.
You're not doomed, no matter what you've experienced up to now, right? Like, there is so much that is reversible even if our doctor tells us it's not, there's so much we're learning that can be reversible or reversed. And you're not doomed. They might say there's no other option because in their tool belt, they don't know of another tool. They have exhausted the tools in their tool belt. Your job in owning your health and being in charge of your health is to find somebody with a different tool belt, because those tools might be the ones that are going to help you get from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah. And I think as a way to co-sign that, I'm going to add on, if things don't make sense, it's because they don't make sense.
Correct.
So if you're looking at a loaf of bread and being like, mold doesn't actually thrive on bread anymore, that doesn't make sense. And there's a reason for it. So paying attention to the things that don't add up, like, why did I go in for a breast exam? Because I found a lump, and then it was at the age of 32. I found out that your period changes the feel and texture of your boobs. Why? That doesn't make sense, but it's purposeful. And a doctor had to be snarky to me about it. So there are gaps in our knowledge for a reason, and it's an active resistance to educate yourself.
I also think it's a piece of negligence that we've just never realized is necessary. And now we know it's necessary and it's important. And as individuals, we owe it to ourselves to do that. And you can do it through a podcast. You can do it through some TV shows. Like, there are ways to do this in a way that doesn't feel daunting, that, is also part of our lives and entertainment. And like, have these conversations with your friends. Like, I learned that women poop when giving birth because a friend was telling me a story of like giving birth to her child. And I'm like, nobody wants to talk about it because it's not cute. But like, I was always like, how is it not possible? Like, if you're pushing and using the same muscles and like the whole process is like very similar to like if you were trying to push out a poop, like, how do you not poop? And my friend was like, you do. And I was like, what do you mean you do? It's like, have the conversations with your friends at the very least. Like, let's start talking about all these things.
Oh my gosh, yes. I had the same moment when we were talking about orgasming and women's sexuality and whatever. I was like, sit around with your girlfriends and be like, this is what makes me orgasm, because there's so much that we just don't know. And we've become it's like gotten to the point where it's like, well, if I don't know it now, I'll never know it. And that's not
Well,
true.
that's a choice as much as
Yeah,
everything else. So maybe that's
right.
your choice. That's cool. You do you, boo. Like,
Do it. But yeah, one of the things I like to tell women is like, well, do you know that we only like lay down during childbirth now because it's easier for the doctor? And just like with the squatty potty, it would also be easier to give birth from that position. And people are like, what do you mean? I was like, gravity. Just think about it in like your fourth grade science terms.
so similar to that, BMI, and at the risk of taking up more time, I did an episode called BMI is BS. So you can go listen to that. But basically, long story short, it was a metric that was designed to study populations over time, not individuals. And it was adopted by our doctors for an individual marker to make it easier for our doctors to have conversations with patients about weight. But it is actually one of the worst metrics of our health and our progress.
Yeah. All the time. And it's something that you'll find on reality TV, in our media, in diet books that you're
Yep.
reading, and it's just fake news, and it's just bad.
I mean, there are other tools, there are other options. They're not as easy. And so our system has chosen easy instead of desired outcomes.
What is a manifestation or a hope that you would like to offer up to the general collective?
Let's be the generation that chooses health and vitality and longevity in every aspect of our lives, in stress, in sleep, in food, in our careers. Like, we can all do that. It starts with the little things that are showing up every day, and the little ways, and like you said, little acts of resistance of saying, you know what? I'm going to reschedule this appointment because what I actually need right now is a nap.
No, I'm just going to co-sign on that one and just hope that people are always, or at least getting to the point where they're realizing, when I say yes, this is what I'm saying no to. And when I say no, this is what I'm saying yes to. And be able to weigh those out and truly make educated choices on what's right for you. Because we get a lot of messaging that every choice we make is finite. and every choice we make is ours, and every consequence that is dealt to us is our fault. And we need to be the generation that starts seeing like how the systems play into that, how our stress plays into it. Why are we so stressed as a generation? And just start asking ourselves those questions.
Absolutely. We're not doomed. Everything, nothing is permanent unless you decide it is.
Yes. That's lovely to remind me that we're not all doomed, because sometimes I do go out into the world and I'm like, y'all, it's not looking great. Jen, thank you for teaching me so much and for giving me science to carry forward and tell people and to recall back on this afternoon. I've really enjoyed our time together.
Well, thank you. Me too.
Make sure that the tolerators know all of the places that they can find you.
Awesome. All right, friends, podcast salad with a side of fries. If you've never eaten that as a meal, please order it and then also join us on the podcast. All social media, I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JennTrepeck. And website, A Salad with a Side of Fries.
That will definitely be in the show notes, as well as Instagram, where to find the podcast and the website in general. I like to make sure that people get connected. Tolerators, you know the drill. There's a handy dandy little ad that tells you all about the fun that we're having on Instagram, Patreon, and YouTube. And remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including all of the messaging that you've been given, that anything negative you could be feeling about your body currently is a moral failure on your part, and you should have just done better and worked harder. Smiles are for joy.